Content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you. What's good, everybody? What's happening? I'm the Green Gorilla, man. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. It's the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, with no chasers. And before I get things started, I'd like to give a shout out to all of the members of the Green Gorilla channel. I'd like to give a shout out to Omni Americana, Deanne, Donald Watts, Barry Little, Ryan Jackson, Hip Hop.catv, Black Wizard ADOS, Coach DC, D Remedy, Kashif Caldwell, Infamous Chillin', I Am Black Man, John Reads Too Much, Nachecha, Leroy Honeycutt, or Nichita. I can't remember which way to pronounce that, man. Nichita. Leroy Honeycutt, True King 337, B Hillfire, Force Windu, Michael Cavanis, Urban Nomad, Bernolas, Kyle J. Sura, I'm Just Jules, The Book of Ronin, Ad Media 83, Damon Harris, Brian McMurray, Mr. Lou Meth, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Shop Talk Live, The Face, Mr. Heat, David the Man, Afro Analyst, NEU, Twice, Ronan Martin, Issa Abdul Sahir, Sir Anthony, Deshaun Nolly, MLR, Charles Rogers, Black Dog, Universal 178, Black's Word 404, Rashid Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, C Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, The Nameless Protagonist, Black Pill Ned Stark, Arthur Unknown, Odd Collard, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Brian Williams, Kalon Jakala, Sherrod Martin, Wiki Dawson, Cedric Bowman, True 7360, BK Born Shahid, James Washington, Hostile Adept, Seven Coast Dojo, WPR1, Roguish the Billmonger, I Care, Lady Miss Thing Green, BGS Ibmore, and Marvin Battle Jr. Thank you all for being members of the Green Gorilla channel. I'd like to give you a round of applause. Thank you for being members of the Green Gorilla channel and helping to support the things that go on behind the scenes. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to Victor A. Coach, Dragon 59, D. Smitty, Supreme Idmore, Adrian Hicks, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi. Again, like I said, NEU twice. Momal, William Ruffin, and Asangua. Thank you all for supporting me on your Patreon page. I appreciate that. And if there's anybody who's inquiring about how to become a member of the Green Gorilla channel, I'll do that later on. But now, I just want to respond to a brother. I see he's in the chat. What's up, Eon? What's up, Kwaku? What's up, Black Wizard? What's up, Rasheed Barnes? See y'all out there. So I'm responding to Eon Graves. He wanted me to do a show about Rawls. So I'm going to do that show. So I'm doing this for you. I know it's not going to be popular and draw a lot of people in, but, you know, I just wanted to do it because you asked for me to do it. So I'm going to do it. And, you know, I made a comment in a Facebook thread, and it was because I was tagged by Eon Graves. And so, you know, I got to talking back and forth to many people who do philosophy professionally. And, you know, we went back and forth and back about this subject matter of distributive justice and whether or not Rawls is accurate in its assessment of how to go about the task of distributing the resources in the society in which we live. And so, look, Rawls is a powerhouse philosopher. You can't really have a serious discussion about distributive justice without having a conversation about Rawls and what he has to say about the matter. So that's why I'm doing this show this evening. So I see you say you appreciate that. No doubt. No doubt, my brother. I'm going to get to it. So let's just get right into it, man. This might take a little bit of time, but let's do it, man. Let's get it done. So I'm going to just start, man. So I'm going to transition and cut the music off. That's something that I didn't want to happen right there, but that's
What's
cool.
your blueprint for a just society? Your answer probably reflects who you are and the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah, let me pause that. That's something I didn't desire to happen, but it's all good. So at any rate, we're going to start this off with a conversation about what is a human being. All right. And then from there, we can proceed to Dworkin, and then we can proceed to Rawls. Okay. So, I mean, if I had to ask any of you out there, what is a human being? Could you give me an answer? What do you think a human being is? I only got 23 people out here right now. So what is a human being? What is it? Well, I'm not going to wait, but is a human being what we actually think it is? What is a human being? What is it? Well, is that a human being? Because this is what Leonardo da Vinci tells us a human being is. That's what he tells it is. A bipedal animal with two arms. Is that it? Is that all? Well, what if there was an alien who came here from outer space and he had the capacity to communicate with us, and he had the same range of capacities as we do, the ability to communicate, to express feelings? Would we consider that to be a human being? Probably not, right? Um, but it is the case that aliens, if they were to ever visit us, would probably not be anything like us. But here I have a picture of chimpanzees. I mean, they're like almost, they're 97% human. We have the same DNA as chimpanzees, but off by 3 points, 3 percentage points. So does our DNA make us human beings? And then, oh, that's another picture of a chimpanzee just chilling out. Um, but what about this individual here? What about him? Apparently, there's some sort of genetic defect that he has. No one, I don't think, would argue that that's not a human being, even though his DNA is somehow defective. Okay, there's some sort of disease that he has. Also, I mean, this person looks disfigured, almost non-human like. Is that a human being? Almost non-human like. Or this individual here, without a nose and without operative eyes, right? Or what about this individual here? I know you really can't see that. I can probably move that image up a little bit to see if you can see what's going on. Well, he's got feet growing out of his stomach, so you can't really see that as much as I would like for you to. But I mean, this person has feet coming out of their stomach, okay? And one could argue that's not a good look. Not a good look. So for most of human history, human beings live together in small hunter-gathering bands. That's just how human beings existed for the majority of human existence on this planet. Okay? And anybody that they came into contact with that wasn't part of their clan, in all likelihood, would be treated like an alien. No talking, no conversation, no discussions. They're the enemy, the alien enemy. They are the other. Killing, forcing, frauding, no problem. Okay? Because anybody outside the context of your clan needs to be dealt with. I got another picture here of, a tribal clan member smiting somebody from another clan. But that's just how human beings behaved towards one another for most of human history. Okay? Now, here's a picture of a white man. And I put that picture up because a lot of people would probably perceive this individual as being a model human being. I mean, a model, supposedly attractive, washboard abs, body symmetry and whatever, no body fat or little next to no body fat, right? So is that representative of what excellence related to human being is? Well, I'll leave you to answer that question. Here's another picture of a white male, supposedly attractive, right? Is that exemplary, or does that exemplify, rather, what humanity is? A white male. Because throughout most of human history, women were perceived as deformed males. In fact, there's a philosopher by the name of Aristotle, and that's exactly what he called women, deformed males. Okay? But it just doesn't stop with women, because here's a picture of a black man, relatively attractive black man. But up until recently, in the motion picture industry, in popular media in the West, black people were presented as less than human, or an or not an extorted, but a kind of a caricature a distorted, that's what I meant to say, a distorted image of what our humanity is like. So you see the big lips, right? And black people do have big lips, but this is distortion, okay? Here's a picture of an Asian man, relatively attractive Asian man, right? But how are Asian men usually depicted in the media? Well, up until recently, you had these distorted images of what Asians look like. So, you know, mostly white people would play the role of Asians. And, you know, they would always have bad teeth. They would be wearing glasses, and they would have slanted eyes. And, you know, Asians do have slanted eyes. But there's a way to represent them accurately, and this just doesn't do it. Okay? Now, here's a picture of a Middle Eastern man, Arabic man, right? So, relatively decent looking man, relatively attractive looking dude. Okay? But how does the media typically portray the humanity of Arabic persons? Distorted, man. These are the kind of images we get. We get distorted images. Okay? So they kind of diminish the humanity of people who are considered to be others if it doesn't fit up to the paradigm of whiteness, particularly male whiteness. Okay? Now, this just begs the question, okay? At the current moment in the academy and in philosophy particularly, people are beginning to use the concept person as opposed to the concept human, and because it has implications that human doesn't encompass. Okay, so when you talk about a person, you're talking about a delineation of a set of rights and a set of obligations that one person has to another person or a group of persons. So that's the difference. Okay, with the concept of human, you're describing something. Maybe you're describing it genetically, or describing human beings genetically. But that might not be enough. You might have to talk about qualities or attributes of persons, which put them in a different category than that of a mere human being. Okay? So, well, what entails personhood? That's the next question, right? What does it entail? Well, many philosophers say that in order to be a person, you have to be capable of psychological and social interaction. You have to be able to communicate with others and interact with them socially. Okay. You also have to be capable of choosing courses of action, and you have to be held responsible or accountable for those actions. So, in essence, a person is a moral agent that has duties and obligations. So, of course, we all know that people have duties to one another, but persons also have duties to themselves. And, some people talk about personhood as being the key to a discussion about the kind of rights that persons have, right? So that's important, right? So human beings are typically referred to in the academy, especially philosophy, as persons, right? And they're moral agents in virtue of being persons, and they have duties and obligations to themselves and to other people. All right. Now, again, I just want to reemphasize this fact. The term person is normative. Now, all a norm is an ought. That's what a norm is. Something you ought to do. Okay? So the term, or something that has value, moral value, or ethical value. Okay? So the term person is a normative concept that tells us what persons should do and what they should not do, and how they should be and how they should not be treated. Right? So A person, again, is a normative concept that tells us what they should and shouldn't do and how people should and shouldn't treat them. All right. So I'm just getting a whole bunch of definitions out of the way so you can understand where I'm coming from as I move through this. All right. Now, this begs the question of the subject matter of equality, because we hear, these terms thrown around a whole hell of a lot. Equality this, equality that. Well, what does it mean to be equal to anybody anyway? Okay. So you start talking about equality, you're talking about a whole lot. Now, as far as I see it, there's 4 distinct ways to talk about equality or to have a conversation or a discussion about it, right? So there's fundamental equality, there's social equality, there's the idea of equal treatment for equals, and then there's the idea of treating equals equally, but treat unequals unequally. Now let's talk about fundamental equality. That's real simple. People should be treated as equals for the most part by the government and by the legal system. Now, this wasn't always the case in the United States, but it is, de jure, the rule. Okay, people should be treated as equals by the government and by the legal system. Everybody's personhood should be acknowledged, right, by the state and by the legal system, which adjudicates related to the state. But then there's the idea also of social equality. And this is the idea that people are equal within the social settings of politics and the economy. In other words, everybody ought to have the right to vote and have the opportunity to hold office and to be able to trade and exchange in the marketplace. Okay? So fundamental equality, social equality, which brings us to the concept of equal treatment for equals. Now, this is an elitist rendition of what equality is, and it dates back to ancient times. Particularly Aristotle talks about this. I mean, Aristotle was an Athenian citizen, a male Athenian citizen, and he had certain privileges associated with being a male Athenian citizen that women didn't have, that foreigners didn't have, and that slaves didn't have. Okay? And it was just commonplace in Athenian society that slaves, foreigners, and women didn't have the same kind of rights as Athenian men. Just commonplace, a matter of culture and tradition. But lastly, there's an idea about equality that calls for people to treat equals equally and unequals unequally. Now, what does this mean? Well, it's simple too. It basically explains why some persons who have special needs ought to have those special needs attended to, right? And it also, in some instances, can call for treating people who've broken the law to treat them unequally as well, right? So if somebody has done something wrong or unlawful, you treat them as, less as a citizen as they otherwise would be treated, right? So those are the 4 ways of defining equality. Because when you start talking about persons and how they should and they shouldn't be treated, you typically run into a conversation about equality. So that's why I provided it here and why I think it's important. Okay. Now, going back to the conversation. Now, here's an example of the difference between merely treating somebody equally and treating someone according to the standards of equity. Now, there's a debate going on in the academy about whether or not we should use the word equality and equity, and whether or not equity is something that ought to be striven for. But I don't want to get into all of that now, but just know that it is happening, right? Because there are a whole bunch of programs or offices that, talk about equity and inclusion. That's like a standard, coupling of words together. And, a whole bunch of offices, of administrators that are centered around making sure that equity and inclusion is taking place in the university. Now, I'm going to be real here. It's not happening. It's just not happening. You definitely don't see a whole bunch of black men in the academy. You see more women, black women in the academy than you see black men, but you don't see enough of them either. It's primarily white men and white women. You got a few Asians sprinkled in here and there, and a few people from other, ethnicities and other races. But for the most part, it's a white space. That's what the academy is. Okay, even though there's this so-called, objective to attain diversity and inclusion, or equity and inclusion. So there's that. But this brings us to the concept of rights. And this is where things is going to start to get interesting more than what I've said thus far. So everybody just assumes that they have rights by nature. Where did you get them from? Now, my personal opinion, I'll let you know, I don't think that there's any such thing as rights. I think that they were a fabrication of Western men during the era of enlightenment. And they came up with the idea of rights in order to basically throw off the yoke of ecclesiastical authority and the divine right of kings, as a new mode of production was beginning to rise up in Europe. So that's my opinion on it. You can think differently about it, but I don't think that there's any such thing as natural rights that people have a right to by nature. Okay? That's just my opinion. You can think I'm wrong, well, whatever. But I would like to hear your argument why. But anyway, so people assume that they have natural rights. And one such person is a philosopher by the name of Ronald Dworkin. Now, every time I see this guy, man, he reminds me of Austin Powers and shit. I mean, he looks just like that guy. But anyway, so Ronald Dworkin is a philosopher who basically says that rights can't be traded for benefits. Now, what does this mean? We'll see a little bit as I move forward. Somebody just hit up something. I don't know. But anyway, so Ronald Dworkin says that rights can't be traded for benefits. And he wrote a book called Taking Rights Seriously. And he looks like a pretty serious guy to me. But so one of the things that he discusses in the context of this book is the subject matter of the freedom of speech. Now, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and of course, everybody should know by now about Mike Brown's death and, the social unrest that took place in a suburb or the county of Ferguson. Now, the question is, if somebody's speech is going to harm society, can you abridge their right to speak freely? And, I got a picture here of Lewis Head, who is Mike Brown's stepfather, right? And he's basically urging protesters, encouraging them to burn this bitch down. And I would show the video, but I had to jump through too many hoops to actually show it. So he's inciting, one could argue, a riot. Now the question is, if we're taking rights seriously, and one could argue freedom of speech is a right that everybody has in Western culture, should we abridge that right or take away that right or punish people for using that right if it's going to create a problem in the society, if it's going to create a problem that's going to cause harm to society, right? Now, so Ronald Dworkin says, look, we can look at this in two different kind of ways. So he creates two different models, right? He's got model 1 and model 2. Now, model 1, that's the video right there. But anyway, so model 1 basically says, okay, you can either balance between the rights of an individual and the needs of society. And I got like a little scale there, right? So you got the needs of society, and then you have the rights of the individual. Or you could basically argue that a basic right should never be abridged because of the possible harmful social consequences. Now, it just so happens that Ronald Dworkin argues model number 2. He says, only in very rare cases should you ever act by the principles espoused in the first model, where you balance the needs of society with the rights of the individual. Right? You should never, well, not never, but you should rarely, if ever, abridge a person's rights in order to bring about some sort of benefit to society as a whole. You just shouldn't do it. So rights are that serious for him. Okay? Now, let's go back to this example. So you got Mike Brown's stepfather urging the people in Ferguson to burn this bitch down. Now, anytime I teach a class and I have a conversation about this, people are going to, especially white people, they're going to argue. That's inciting the riot. You can't do that. You can't do this. And then the first thing I'll do is I'll make a reference to the pamphleteers in the American Revolution. I'll say the same thing. Didn't they incite a riot on many occasions, the founding fathers of America? Or did they not? And if they did, were they not justified in doing so? And wasn't that the reason for which the freedom of speech came about in the first place? I'm pretty sure that the Crown in England didn't appreciate them speaking the way they wanted to speak. They wanted to curb their speech. So the First Amendment is predicated upon the American colonists being able to speak freely and to say what they want to say, even if it caused a harm to the society, especially to the Crown. Okay? Now, even if it leads, I think, Ronald, to unrest like this, where you got people throwing fire and bombs and shit, it's okay with Dworkin. The speech is, maybe not these actions, but the speech is justified. The speech is permissible, even if it does incite a riot. So even if it leads to that, burning cop cars or turning them over, it's okay. You can't abridge a person's rights in order to bring about a benefit to society. Okay? Now, I just want you to be mindful of this before I close out with this. Right? When you infringe upon a person's rights, you harm the individual. You harm them. But on the other hand, when you inflate somebody's right, you harm society. You harm a community. That's important to acknowledge, right? When you abridge somebody's rights, you harm the individual. When you inflate an individual's rights, you harm society. That's a problem. Right now, there's a whole bunch of conversation going on about Donald Trump and whether or not he has a right to protest the election results. And, people are like, you have no right to do that. Well, according to the Constitution, I think he does have a right to do it. Now, the question is whether or not, he ought to do it just merely predicated upon the concept of rights. Maybe perhaps he should allow his right to be abridged so that we can get on and move on, transition into the next phase of politics, right? But it's important to understand that when you infringe a right, you harm the individual. When you inflate a right, you harm society. All right. Now, everybody knows what this is. That's 9/11. And that's the Twin Towers on fire because 2 planes crashed into them. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into a debate on whether or not those planes actually could have took the bridges down and whether or not there were explosives inside of the towers ahead of time. That's all conspiracy theory. I don't have any real knowledge of whether that occurred or not. I just don't know. Okay. But what I do know is that I did see, and many other people can corroborate what was seen on television, some airplanes ran into those towers and they came down. Okay. Now, after having come down, guess what happened? You get the Patriot Act. Okay? After the towers come down, you get the Patriot Act. Now, I don't know if you know what the Patriot Act is, but it's an act of Congress. It was passed by George Bush, no one, And it's an acronym. It basically means uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism act. Okay, that's what it stands for. That's what the acronym means, Patriot. All right. So for the most part, the Patriot Act permits and allows for wiretapping, searching of business records, and the surveillance of people that they call lone wolves. And you can talk to diehard Americans, like the most conservative, rights-oriented, libertarian thinkers, and they will say this is acceptable. Wiretapping, just randomly, searching people's business records, or, just surveilling people that they consider to be, weird. Like, this person is not behaving like the average American person. But then the question becomes like, well, what person is that? And, notwithstanding all the ways in which people in the CIA, the FBI, they've been surveilling people all the time. They're probably surveilling people on YouTube. Just in case you didn't know. All right. So they surveil people who belong to political organizations, the whole nine. Right. So anyway, they passed this act. Well, President Bush did. And it's still standing. Still standing. Now, I say all of this to say, I remember, man, a long time ago when I was a little boy, man, you used to be able to go to the airport and run in and out, go back and forth, go gate to gate, do whatever you wanted to. Now, when you go to the airport, you got to go through checkpoints. People search you. They put their hands on you. They pat you down. They frisk you to make sure that you don't have anything that they deem dangerous. They tell you what you can and what you can't put in luggage. They tell you where you can and where you can't go in the airport. Now, this is something that, like I said, I didn't grow up with this. But you ask anybody like who's 20 years old, 25, 30 and under, to them, this is commonplace. This is just business as usual. Not for me. I remember, in the old days, you used to go greet whoever was getting off the plane at the gate. You pick up their luggage right there at the gate. Well, maybe not, but you would at least greet them right there at the gate. Okay? But all of this has changed. And again, as I said before, the NSA has the ability, and one could say, and I'm using air quotes here, the right to look, at your data on your computer, your tablets, your phones. They have the capacity to do all of that. And it's justified by this act. Now, the question is this infringing upon people's rights? Since you want to talk about rights, people's rights are infringed all the time. But, I digress. So there's the idea. So when you talk about rights, people typically, they're talking about negative rights, right? So a negative right is a right that individuals have regarding non-interference. And that's non-interference from governments and from other people, other persons. So when you talk about rights in America, typically you're talking about the kind of rights associated with not being interfered with by the government or not being interfered with by other people. That's why they call it negative rights, because it's the right not to have something occur to you. So that's why they call it negative rights. All right. And the primary deviser of this idea of rights is John Locke. He wrote a book called The Second Treatise of Government. And in that book, he lays out the fact that, or the idea that people have a right to their life. They have a right to their freedom or their liberty, and they have a right to their property. And, he talks about the state of nature, and he has a discussion about how in the state of nature, each person has a right to their life. They have a right to defend their life, and that people have a right to be free because they're born free, and they can defend their freedom if necessary. And he says the same thing about property, that if you mix up your labor in acquiring things, that becomes your property. And your labor tied up in acquiring it is that which gives you the right to it. Okay? So that's the idea being expressed there. So you got a right to life, liberty, and property. Now, of course, there are people in American culture and Western culture in general who kind of rehash these ideas. I mean, one popular author is Ayn Rand, and she says something similar. That Western culture, but the United States in particular, is a moral society and is based on the right to one's own life. Nobody can call upon you to aid them, to help them, to assist them, right? And anybody who does this is being less than ethical. They're not standing up for themselves. They're not doing what's necessary, right, to take care of themselves, which all dignified and honorable persons would do. Okay. And another person who kind of echoes who echoes these sentiments about negative rights is a philosopher by the name of John Hospers. And he basically defends negative rights vigorously, and he's a libertarian, and he hates free riding. He hates for people to use other people, or to demand that other people help them, right? And he calls that moral cannibalism. In other words, I mean, I'm thinking about a popular song. So, like, I'm an old school dude, so I remember a song by Biggie Smalls that went like this. How that shit go? It says, "Fuck the world, don't ask me for shit. Everything you get, you work hard for it. Honey, shake your tits, whatever." So in other words, man, don't ask me for some shit. You go get it. Take care of your own. I know there's Tupac. He had a song that was similar to that. Get your own. Don't ask me. Go and get yourself some. Don't ask me for it. You go get it. So this is the sentiment, and it's not just a sentiment that stingy or avaricious white men utilize. I mean, people everywhere, all over, utilize this idea, right? So that's important to understand. Now, what I want to do is shift away from negative rights and talk a little bit about what people consider to be positive rights. And let me go back here because I didn't intend for this to be here, but I'll just it'll get there in a second. Let me cut that. All right. And I guess it's going to take a little time for it to kick in and do what it's supposed to do. My bad, man. I got this. It's not doing exactly what I want right when I want it, but it's going to do it at some point, I assume. Okay. Okay, there we go. I got to go back. My bad, y'all. For some reason, it wasn't acting right, so. All right, so here we go. So we talked about negative rights. Now it's time for me to talk about positive rights. Okay? And sorry about that delay. But positive rights are usually considered to be entitlements that all people, all persons in society ought to be able to enjoy, and that should be granted by the government. Right? So what's an example of positive rights? Well, Karl Marx and his theorizing. Now, a lot of y'all probably do not like Marx, but ultimately what Marx argues is that, to each according to his need, from each according to their ability or according to ability. And, I don't know if I can get with Marx all the way my damn self. I'm not a communist. I think there always will be inequality. But I mean, really, if there is enough for everybody to go around, should we really have people lying homeless in the streets? Like, why is that necessary? You know, I mean, I don't like free riding either, but damn, do we have to, you know, do we have to have people, you know, homeless on the streets? It seems like, you know, a little bit, a little bit extreme. So one could argue, you know, look, what do persons need just by being alive? Well, they need food, clothing, shelter, work, and education. Okay? Now, these are all things that people are in need of in order to survive. If they don't have food, clothing, shelter, meaningful work, and education, they're not functional human beings or functional persons. So therefore, there are some people who say these things should be provided for by society to everyone. Now, let me just say this, man. All of us grew up in a society. We didn't grow up in nature. We didn't grow up in hunter-gathering bands, none of it. We grew up in a society with a whole bunch of material shit everywhere. Now, I can understand, you know, you being a member of a hunter-gatherer society or some tribe and you don't do your part or your share. It's easy to figure out exactly who is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And to punish them or, you know, to criticize them for that. But like when you live in a society full of millions of people, how do you determine who and who is not actually free riding? How do you do that? I mean, it may be some ways to do this, but it's not an exact science, right? And I think that the more intimate your relationship with an individual, the more you're able to know whether or not they're free riding or they're being lazy, they're bullshitting. But it's very difficult to tell in a society just by looking at the outcome of finding out where a person is right now. It just seems to me erroneous. You can't do that. People do it all the time, but they shouldn't do that. Okay. So anyway, food, clothing, shelter, meaningful work, and education. And this is where this is leading up to Rawls. Okay. So some people say that at some point we're going to approach the threshold of a post-capitalist state as the forces of automation become more and more preeminent, and as people become closer and closer together through the internet or through technology, bartering and people giving one another what they need without the aid of, you know, or without the need for the medium of money, you're going to start to see more and more of that. That's what some people, you know, postulate. So what do you do then? If the machines are able to do all the work. Now, I don't know if they're creating like nanotechnology and all kind of shit. I mean, it's not unfeasible to one day people to throw, you know, a ball of sand in the air or what appears to be, and for nanotechnites to begin to perform work, to make buildings and to, you know, to construct shit. So what happens when that occurs and human labor becomes obsolete? What do you do then? What happens then? So anyway, it's just something to think about. I don't want to do a video on that. That's really not my cup of tea for real. But anyway, here comes the subject matter of Rawls. And I talk about rights because Rawls interpolates rights into his political ideals and to his notions of distributive justice. So that's why I wanted to go through all of that. And then he talks about what it's like to be a person or what persons ought to be given and how they ought to be treated. He does all of that. So that's why I covered as much as I covered up until this point. Now, according to Rawls, justice is fairness. And most people consider Rawls to be a liberal, a modern liberal, and he's an egalitarian liberal. And what he does is he combines both positive and negative rights in his theory of justice. Okay. Now, so what Rawls tells us to do is, as individuals, thinking about what is fair. He says, well, perform a thought experiment. And this thought experiment, I mean, more or less, is going to be comprised of three different parts. Okay, you have the original position, the veil of ignorance, and I'm just using the birthday cake analogy. Okay, now we got to perform this thought experiment. This is what's going to go down. Okay, so the original position. Just think about it. Okay, it's a hypothetical situation that John Rawls makes up to replace the imagery of the state of nature. And of course, people like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they all develop a different theory about the state of nature and how men come up out of it. But instead of using the state of nature as a starting point, he uses a thought experiment called the original position. And in this position, people are required to devise or to select the principles that is going to establish or that are going to establish the basic structure of the society in which they're going to live. Okay? So think about it. You're about to create a society. Think about the principles that you're going to adopt to form the basic structure of the society in which you're going to live. Okay? So it's a pre-social theory. So this is supposed to take place in order to, give you some hypothetical understanding of what it would be like prior to being social, which I think is a mistake. I just have a problem with people who, use ideal theory to talk about states that are counterfactual in order to make, points about how people should conduct themselves in the real world. But I mean, you can't really have an honest conversation. Well, not honest, but a developed conversation about distributive justice without talking about Rawls, because he's the preeminent philosopher in Western society at this point, and everybody refers to him when they talk about distributive justice, in the academy anyway. Okay? So, he says, it's a hypothetical instead of an anthropological ideal. Okay? And it's a concept. And it's not factual, right? Now, while you're in the original position, you're also supposed to put on what Rawls calls the veil of ignorance. So he says, not only are you going to imagine making up rules for the society in which you live, the basic structure of it, you're also, while you're doing that, you're going to imagine yourself to have on a veil of ignorance. So ignorant to what? Not ignorant as in some ignorant shit, but ignorant as in you don't know who you're going to be in that society. You don't know if you're going to be rich or poor, white or black, religious or non-religious, short or tall, healthy or unhealthy. You don't know what you're going to be. So when you make up the rules, you have to make them up in such a way that you can be anybody in the society in which you live. So that's what the veil of ignorance is. Okay? And from this point, he begins to talk about distributive justice. But before we get to that, I guess I'll go. So anyway, then he makes this departure into what, and I got to leave out parts. The best I can do here is give you an outline because this can become cumbersome, okay? So at any rate, he then talked about distributive justice, right? How do you fairly distribute the goods of the society in which you live? How do you allocate them fairly, right? Now, he says, in the veil of ignorance, right, or under the veil of ignorance, no one knows his place in society, his class position, social status, nor does he know his fortune in the distribution of natural assets and abilities. Now, this is where it gets interesting, okay? You don't know whether you're smart or you're not smart. You don't know if you got a high IQ or not. You don't know what your family life is like. You don't know if you were born to a single parent home or a single parent mother, or you were born in one of the wealthiest families with all of the, traditional roles associated with fatherhood, motherhood, and grandfatherhood and all of that. All of that is intact. You don't know, right? So you don't know how strong you are, how weak you are. You don't know anything about yourself, okay? When you're devising these rules to make up the basic structure of the society in which you live. And this is why I'm going to show this video and why I wanted to get it prepped up. I think I got the audio going for it, so I'm just going to play it. And then after that, you'll kind of see what it is I'm talking about. So let me make that transition. And here's the video.
What's your blueprint for a just society? Your answer probably reflects who you are and the situation you find yourself in. If you're rich, you may well be in favor of the freedom to earn and enjoy the fruits of your efforts. If you're poor, you're likely to be more supportive of a system that redistributes wealth. Now answer the same question with this twist. You won't know what kind of person you'll be in the society you design. What you have to do is construct it from behind a veil of ignorance. You might end up black, white, in a wheelchair, straight, gay, born into a wealthy family, or living in extreme poverty. You might enjoy knitting, rock music, opera, tiddlywinks, or cage fighting, maybe even all of these. You just don't know how you'll end up. This is the thought experiment at the heart of John Rawls's book, A Theory of Justice. He argued that from behind the veil, we'd opt for a much fairer society than we now have. There would be extensive freedom and fair equality of opportunity, but there wouldn't be extremes of high pay unless it could be shown that the poorest in society directly benefited as a result.
All right, so that's kind of fleshing out or giving you an example of the veil of ignorance and what it's supposed to accomplish. Okay, so going back to what I was doing before. So let me transition. Now, the way I explain this is by means of what I call the birthday cake analogy. All right, so let's say, for example, it's your birthday and you love cake and you're at the party and you're going to be the first person to cut this cake. Now, if you're the first person to cut the cake and you're able to get the first piece, you're probably going to get a big ass piece. You're going to take a big piece for yourself. Okay? However, if you don't know when you're going to be able to get a piece of cake, how are you going to cut the cake? Let me rephrase this. If you know that you're going to be the last person to get a piece of cake and you love cake, how are you going to cut the cake? Well, people like Rawls are going to say you're going to cut it equally. You're going to make sure you cut all of that cake equally so that you get a piece just as equal to the amount that everyone else is going to get. In other words, he's trying to demonstrate that people, for the most part, they understand what fairness is, especially when the conditions exist where there's uncertainty and you don't know when it is or how it is you're going to get your slice of the pie, or in this case, the cake. Okay? So he says that we already intuitively and definitely reasonably can understand what it is that's fair in relation to distribution. So this is just a simple way of explaining, Rawls' idea of the veil of ignorance within the context of the original position, and eventually somehow allowing people to understand what's fair in the scheme of distribution. All right, so now Rawls, I swear it's almost done. So basically Rawls comes up with two main principles of justice, okay? And this is where he tries to marry together both negative and positive rights. So that's his project. And this is why people praise him, because they feel like, okay, well, He's an analytic philosopher, and he explains adroitly how to connect these two kinds of rights. All right. So the first principle is the principle dealing with negative rights. All right. And he basically says each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with similar liberty for others. Everybody is free as everybody else as much as can possibly be imagined or brought to fruition. Everybody is as free as everyone else as much as they can be. All right. And the second principle is social inequalities, if they exist, are to be arranged so that they are both A, reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and attached to positions and offices open to all. So the first principle is negative. The second principle is positive. Okay? Now, the first principle is called the liberty principle. In my viewpoint, it's basically Kantian philosophy or ethical theory, right? Deontology. Now, I don't know if I've ever had a discussion with you about what deontology is, but deontology is really just, a fancy word for duty theory. That's what it means, duty theory. Okay? And Kant basically says, look, you can't create a principle of action to act on that you can't will to be a universal law governing everyone else in a kingdom of ends. I mean, he always attaches that shit to it. But I mean, the idea is you can't make up a principle of action for yourself. And he believes that all human beings are rational agents for the most part. So you're rational agents, and you can think about what it is that you want to do in terms of a principle. So he calls them maxims. Okay. All individuals can make up maxims for themselves. Now, you can ask questions about maxims. You can ask three of them. You can ask a technical question, a prudential question, and a moral question. Right now, we're dealing with the moral aspect of maxims. Right? Now, I can make a maxim. Shit, when I go, to the, when I go to a business meeting, I'm going to fuck all these bitches, as many as I can, while my wife's back at the crib chilling with the baby. I mean, you can make a principle of action like that, right? But according to Kant, you can't do that and abide by that principle if you can't will for it to be a universal law governing everyone in a kingdom of ends. And what a kingdom of ends means is that people are imbued with dignity innately. People aren't to be used as means to ends. People are ends in themselves, in and of themselves. So everybody has inherent or innate dignity, and you can't use people. Okay? So that's what he means when he says a kingdom of ends. So, shit, if you say it's cool to do that, then it's cool for your wife to do it. And not only is it cool for your wife to do it, but she always does it. And not only does your wife do it, but everybody else's wife does it. And everybody else's husband does it. Now, I mean, we could talk about the real world versus the normative world, but it's clearly the case that not everybody is an adulterer. Some people are, right? Maybe a lot more than there should be. But can you justify it? Or let's say, for example, lying. Okay? So I can make up a maxim, well, I'm going to lie. Well, let me use a better one. But Kant does talk about lying, and he says you should never lie. Well, let's talk about cheating. Okay? It's my policy to cheat on my test so I can get a good grade. So he says you can't operate by that principle if you don't will for it to be a universal law that everyone abides by, and they always lie. I mean, or cheat. What would, if the consequences in the end are that you're living in a society or a social order in which everybody is lying and cheating, you don't want to be a member of that community, do you? Well, if you don't want to be a member of that kind of community, there's no justification for you to behave that way or to make a principle of action for yourself that consists in deeds such as lying or cheating. You can't universalize it. And it's really, it's just a way to kind of embody reasonably the idea of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Really, it's a philosophical rendition of that ideal or that moral principle. All right. So anyway, you got the liberty principle. I think it's Kantian. Okay. It provides for basic and universal respect for persons as a minimum standard for all just institutions. So every institution is supposed to respect all persons. And it is the case that while all persons are equal, in the real world, there are going to be significant differences between individuals. And that's going to lead to social and economic inequality. This is going to happen. And I kind of concur with Rawls here. It really doesn't matter if you got equal opportunity. Different people are going to have different talents. Some people are going to be smarter than others, like I said before. Some people are going to be more visually appealing. Some people are going to look better than other people. Okay? And how tall you are and how good you look often determines how successful you're going to be in the society in which you live. That's just the way the shit goes, right? And so he's basically saying we have to somehow redress, these kind of differences amongst people, such that everyone can have a fair opportunity to enjoy the goods that accrue from society in general. All right. Now the second principle is the principle he calls the difference principle. It's based on positive rights or positive idea of liberty. All right. And here's the difference principle. You can have inequality. It's okay. It's permitted. But if there is going to be inequality, it has to be arranged in such a way that it works to the benefit of the least advantaged members of society. So what does that mean? It means if you're going to pay doctors a lot of money, it's got to be to the benefit of people who are less well off than they are. And one could argue doctors aren't going to become doctors if there's no incentive to become one. So we're going to pay them more money because you want to incentivize people becoming doctors so that they can actually help poor people or people who are less well off. Because doctors also help people who are less well off, especially if they got Medicaid or Medicare or child health insurance, whatever. So that's the idea, man. That's the difference principle. So what Rawls thinks he's doing is he's mixing up positive and negative liberty together, okay? And there are a lot of people who are critical of Rawls. One of them is a woman by the name of, well, hold on, wait a minute. I think I got this mixed up. Yeah, I wouldn't even worry about it. So there are these philosophers. So yeah, okay, Elizabeth Wolgast. For some reason these slides got out of order. But I'm tired of reading these damn slides. But anyway, there's a woman by the name of Elizabeth Wolgast, and she basically says, and I kind of agree with this, not for the same reasons, but I mean, what lies underneath it, I kind of agree with it. Basically, Wolgast says the history of Western individualism as ideology is what Rawls is doing. And he uses an atomistic model, right? And she criticizes it for being insufficient because she says in real life, right, you have other features not described by what she considers to be atomism, such as relationships with other people and responsibilities that you have to those people predicated upon the social relationships you form. So she's a communitarian, okay? And communitarianism in general is just this political theory which basically says that society is not just a collection of individuals. That's not what society is. But it's part of the purpose of the life of the individual, right? And what does that mean? I mean, you're born in association and you're born in a community that gives you a set of values. You don't start off as an atom. You don't start off as an individual in a hypothetical or a counterfactual situation. You don't start off that way. You start off in a community. You were born and raised in a community of others. And what they value, you come to value as well. So, I mean, those are the kind of thoughts underlying her opposition to his theory, right? The starting point is something she critiques. And going back, so Marilyn Friedman criticizes Wolgass, another woman, and she says, look, yeah, I understand you're, critiquing Rawls for being abstract and atomistic, right? And I know where it's coming from. It's coming from feminists and, other people who see themselves as arms of a network as opposed to just, atomistic individuals. But she says there's a danger in communitarianism. And that danger is that you can have traditions embedded within a community that are just as oppressive as the ones you feel like you're overcoming by means of, making communitarian arguments, right? So, or advancing, the ideal of communitarianism. And then she also says, like, your communities are not given to you. They are in one sense, but after a certain period of time, you can develop your own sense of community. You can leave the community in which you were born and take on a new one by choice, right? You don't have to live in a neighborhood to be a member of a community. You could be part of the manosphere, or you could be a feminist. You could be an intersectionalist. Shit, you could be a Proud Boy. You don't have to, you could be a member of BLM and espouse its politics, its viewpoints. So, her idea is that you don't have to just, perceive, you can't just perceive community as something that's given and something you don't choose. And also, community in and of itself is not necessarily valuable because you can come from or be a member of an oppressive community initially, right? So those are her opposition points. And I just want to talk real quick about one more concept and I'm done with this shit, all right? So I want to talk about forward and back-looking justice, okay? So forward-looking justice basically is focused on the future, right? And the outcomes of what's going to happen in the future. And it's typically labeled as utilitarian. Now, I don't know if you know anything about ethics, but when you talk about ethics, primarily there are two theories that people tend to, adopt, and they clash. You either got utilitarian ideals and you ascribe to those, or you're either a Kantian, which means that you espouse deontology or duty theory. And they come into contact with each other and they don't mix. They're like oil and water, okay? So utilitarians are looking for the greatest good for the greatest number. They're, perfectly fine with a few people having to suffer if the greatest or the vast majority of people are going to benefit. But deontologists, they just refuse to accept that because they feel like everybody has innate dignity and that everyone's innate dignity ought to be respected and acknowledged. So, you got these are the two main theories that are in conflict with one another. All you got to do is take an ethics course and you'll see that. All right. And it's not a whole bunch of ethical theories out there, just in case you didn't know. So there's that. So there's forward-looking justice and there's backward-looking justice. So forward-looking justice is utilitarian. It's looking for what's going to be positive in terms of hedonism in the future. And then you got backward-looking justice, right? Which is going to seek compensation for a past wrong, okay? Now, according to John Rawls and his theory of the original position, his theory is hybrid because it's forward and backward looking. So the liberty principle basically says that people need freedom to actualize their potential, and if they're not given the chance to do so, then they'll have no incentive to accomplish goals and to establish life plans. So you need negative liberty, right? Which is a forward-looking form of liberty. But then he says also you need the difference principle, which is backward looking, right? Especially to the extent to which it seeks compensation for past social injustices, and that it needs to redress those injustices, or that people feel like there's a need to redress those injustices. Okay, so and then also he talks about something called the natural lottery, and it's just the lottery of birth. Some people are born with like all the goods, and then some people are not. Not everybody is born, tall and handsome. They're just not. Some people are born short and dumpy and funny looking. It just is what it is. So how do you redress, what nature allots? Now, there's a lot of people out there who are going to be opposed to this. One such person is Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell hates this viewpoint. And, his argument is, well, how can you correct the cosmos? Like, how can you correct nature? Like, it's not my job as a citizen to make sure that because you were born short and ugly, that somehow, society is going to make up for that and, take care of you for that. It's just the luck of the draw, man. Like, we can't go about doing this kind of thing. It would take too much effort and too much work. And, my response to that, or, look, men all throughout the world do the best that they can to resist against the forces of nature. That's what we do. That's what human beings do. Like air conditioning, heating, cars, open heart surgery. All of that shit redresses nature. I mean, it just does. So, I mean, my counter argument to him would be we resist against nature all the time. There's no reason for us to just accept nature. Now, I understand his sentiment, though. I get it. I really do. But so let's look at a policy like affirmative action. Now, you can either look at affirmative action as a forward-looking or a backward-looking policy. Right? Now, if you're looking at it as a forward-looking policy, you'll say, okay, we need to improve the future conditions for people who live in poverty and in need. And so, therefore, we're not worried about what happened in the past. We just need to make sure that in the future, there's no dysfunction and gross inequality. So one could argue on that grounds you should promote the policy of affirmative action. But then you could also justify it on backward-looking grounds and say, well, we need affirmative action to resolve and to compensate for past injustices, regardless as to what's going on now. So, I mean, you can look at it in both of those ways. So that's basically it, man. So I'm done with that shit right now. And I did all this for Ian. And I'm just, I don't know if you got a more clear idea where Rawls is coming from or not. But this is what Rawls advocates for. So it's a strange hybrid between negative and positive liberty. So he doesn't want to get rid of negative liberty, but he doesn't want to throw off positive liberty either. So he tries to conjoin them in the liberty principle and the difference principle. So that's what he does. If any of y'all got any questions about this, you could ask me and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. I know it's kind of complex. It's not the most titillating or interesting subject. But it is, I mean, if you're going to start having conversations about what people should get, about how to redress poverty and all of that, you need to know something about Rawls because people refer to him all the time in the academy. And, it'll make you look smarter at a cocktail party, I guess. I don't know. But I want to thank the people who gave contributions. I want to thank Micah, the comedian. He says, Gigi, can you do a video on the book Rethinking Rufus by Thomas A. Foster? I would like to hear your take on that book. Salute. I don't have a problem with it. I have to check it out. I don't see a problem with that. Rethinking Rufus. Thank you, Extended Clips, for your contribution. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Heat. I know today was dry, man. I just wanted to get through it. Felicia Gray says the Declaration of Independence gives people the right to overthrow the government. That's an old comment, earlier on in the stream. But JG, thank you for your contribution. I appreciate that. And yeah. So if y'all got any questions, if anybody has any questions on what I said, uh, you could ask it now. Otherwise, man, I'm gonna take a quick break. I'm gonna come back and fade out because I've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, man. And this, I mean, I do this kind of work, but it's not like the most interesting shit in the world to me, you know. So I'll be right back, man.
Black male studies started off as an academic argument. I thought I was making an intervention into history by just trying to show people that black men were victims of rape during slavery and Jim Crow. And it was just that. It was only that. Just an academic argument. Until I started actually meeting black men who were victims of rape, who were raped by their mother's friends, teenage girls, or other men who lived in their own neighborhood. Your whole life changes when you hear grown black men holding back tears or speaking through the pain of physical, sexual, or domestic abuse at the hands of black men and women who should have loved them, cared for them, or at the most basic level, not harmed them.
And we're back, but I don't have any visual right now. I got to get it going. Yeah, so we are back. I'm GG. You're tuned into the Green Gorilla channel. I just had like this abstract conversation about rights, whether or not you can inflate or ought to inflate a right, infringe a right. We had a conversation about two different models, according to Dworkin, about what you should do related to rights. On the one, you can balance them, the needs of society with the rights of the individual. And then, or you can never abridge a right in order to gain some sort of social utility. So that's where we left off. And then we picked up on positive and negative rights. Negative rights are rights not to be interfered with. Positive rights are rights that you have uh, just in virtue of being a human being, in the state as much as it possibly can should try to provide for them. So it is what it is. So if there's no questions, man, I'm gonna burn out. And I try to keep it as simple as possible. This stuff can get it's more complex than what I let on in the way I explained it. But I just tried to keep it basic. So yeah. And then about this documentary, man, like it won't happen if we don't make it happen. So I'm not gonna sit here and argue with people about it anymore. I just think it would be good for black men all throughout the country. It will give us a space to have conversations that typically aren't had in the academy and elsewhere. Um, I think it would be a good look. And black men in the manosphere could make it happen unilaterally through their own will and volition, through their own agency. They could be a catalyst for making it happen. So, and it could change the social landscape of the country in which we live because it would definitely start a conversation in the academy. It would force a conversation in the academy, and it's not actually happening right now. So, but if there are no questions about this, I'm out of here, man. So, Ian, I especially expected for you to ask a question because I did all this for you. But if any of y'all want me to do something, I see one brother asked me if I would do rethinking Rufus. I'll try to do that, but it might take me a couple of weeks for me to actually do it if I want to do it right. So Yeah. So if that's it, man, I'm out of here, man. Shoot, I'm about to go ahead and, man, make these wings. You know what I'm saying? I'm hungry. I'm about to make these wings. About to eat. So I'll holler at y'all later, man. Peace out. Love. One.
I know you player haters gon' hate, cause I'm at the finish line and I'm in the first place. I'm a winner, and I know I'll never lose, cause I'm way too ahead of you, dude. I know you player haters gon' hate, cause I'm at the finish line and I'm in the first place. I'm a winner, and I know I'll never lose, cause I'm way too ahead of you, dude. I'm coming. Okay, here I go. Guaranteed to be the leader of the race, come in first place. Put the pedal to the metal, let it burn, then I blow up in your face for the boom of the big bass. Turn around, nigga, block face. Nigga, turn up the track, leave you hooked with a burnt face. Fuck a nigga, cause he gon' hate. Put some pimpin' in his cup, set him up for the date rate. I go, I blaze, throw grenades in the party till I'm clearing out the whole place. Who got that block money loan? You can hear it in my tone that I own, you don't know me. Better run, nigga, bustle like a gun. Ain't a motherfucker nigga that can hold me. I'm tired of nigga suckin', find your bitch so she can blow me. Ain't nobody never chased like a young boy, many bomb boys, and he hit like a donkey. And he roll with a convoy with them hot toys. If you really wanna get it jumpin'. I blow that monkey, that hairy back green gorilla. Take it through the nose, put it on my mind, I'm a beast like Michael Jackson Thriller. Your boys are trippin', I ain't hearing till you're speaking something. Don't do too much because your pussies always do it for me. Yeah, get it good, get it like I should. All the hate motherfuckers better keep it coming. Put them all in a bar to a bomb and that motherfucker leave they body slumping. I know you player haters gon' hate, cause I'm at the finish line and I'm in the first place. I'm a winner, and I know I'll never lose.